So the other day I was hanging out in the wedding photography Reddit thread and came across this really awesome question.
Hi, I have my first church ceremony coming up, and a second shortly after. I've been looking into to-dos/don't dos, got some information from the couple regarding the ceremony, etc. But it seems they can vary quite broadly, which is creating some nerves. I should also mention I do not come from a religious background and do not have much experience in churches in general. Looking for advice on church ceremonies and things you have learned along the way, any help is always appreciated.
This is a question I know a lot of new wedding photographers have, so let's talk about how to deal with a church wedding. Also, thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. We'll be talking about them later on. Before we actually talk about how to handle a church wedding, you have to understand kind of the three main types of churches, as I would say. Starting out with your Catholic and Protestant style churches. These are your fully traditional churches, super large, huge on the inside, big altar area, stained glass. It's generally what you're thinking of when you have a church wedding. These generally can be the most challenging, but it really depends on the church and the church staff and how they approach the wedding. Next up, you have your smaller churches, Baptist churches, or like old school churches, as I would call it. These also have more of a traditional look to them. They're just a little bit smaller. Like my grandmother's church was a smaller type church, so I grew up being in one of these type of churches myself. They still kind of have some stained glass, not totally, but it's the general pews, almost like a Catholic church, just like half the size. Generally, these are not as hard as the larger Catholic churches because there tends to be more light. Either there's not as much stained glass or the area is just not as big. They have more lights in there. It's generally easier to handle. And then last up, you have your modern churches. Now, these can range. They range from the super modern ones that are basically almost like a factory warehouse. They generally will have a stage on the front, not really an altar, and not a lot of space, not pews, but just chairs. So there's those, and then there's also the like super swanky, artsy looking churches. Now, these are more fun and they tend to be easier to shoot. Understanding these three types of churches really helps out because it's not as easy as saying, oh, I have a church wedding and I'm worried about it, because each of these type of churches will handle their weddings very differently and the lighting on each of them are going to be almost totally different. Now that we know about the three different styles of churches, let's talk about how to handle a wedding at these churches. But first off, to be successful at a church wedding, there's things you actually have to do before the wedding. The biggest thing you're going to need to do is make sure you ask your couple if there's any rules at the church. This hands down is the most important thing you can do, mainly because it's going to help you get your gear set and ready for that ceremony. Now, I don't know about you all, but I don't like to bring every piece of gear I have. I know they have the big roller bags and stuff, but I like to travel light with just enough. So asking this question for me is hugely important because if I need to bring some additional gear, I can pack it and be ready for that. A great story on my end where this did not work out well for me is that I had a wedding in South Carolina somewhere. It was an absolutely beautiful church. And we get there, I hadn't asked beforehand if there were any rules. But I get there, I start talking to an officiant, and they let me know that there's like 50 billion rules, and I basically have to stand in the back of the church, and I can't really move anywhere. So I'm like super bummed about it because it's such a beautiful church. The photos were going to be amazing, but now I can't really do anything. And the worst part is the longest lens I had was an 85. Now, this wasn't the largest church in the world, but from the altar to the back door was far enough that I needed at least like a 110 or something, and I did not have one with me. So, luckily enough, my bride was okay because I had to tell her, like, I can't really get super close up photos. This is when I was shooting with the X-T3 still. And, you know, if I had a GFX, I could have just cropped in. It wouldn't have been a problem. But I was like, I only have an 85. I'll do what I can. And she's like, yeah, that's fine. It's whatever. So again, in that scenario, it worked out. But you're going to want to ask this beforehand. If you see that the location is going to be at an old traditional style church, immediately ask if there's any rules. And your couple may have not even thought to think about that, but usually they'll ask and there'll be a whole sheet of the rules that you'll need to follow. The type of stuff you're going to see on this list is not using flash, not being in the aisle, not getting up on the altar, and staying generally in certain areas with not a lot of movement. And now this is not a huge problem, but again, like I said, you can plan for this if you know it's coming up. And then also just make sure you're following those rules as well. Because you got to think, half of the reason that these churches have these rules is there was some photographer like doing some craziness or just trying to be modern and fun and cool. But at the end of the day, the church is trying to respect the wedding itself. They want it to be more of an important ceremony rather than like a photo shoot. So make sure you're following these rules to a T. I know they're annoying. I know they're the absolute worst, but but this couple hired you to be a professional at their wedding. Make sure you're showing that while you're there. So I know sometimes we like to bend the rules a little bit, but just really make sure you're following those rules and you're not doing too much. One of the things I like to do, especially at the Catholic weddings, the longer full mass ones, is that whenever they stand or they sit, I'm going to kneel down when they're sitting and I'm going to stand when they're standing. These are the type of things you can do that are very small, but it'll help you fit into the wedding a little bit more and not stand out and disrespect the wedding at all. Also, generally, you can tend to get a little bit closer to the altar if you're respecting the ceremony like that as well. Since you're basically acting like a guest, standing and sitting when they do as well, you're not in the way and you're kind of just blending in more. And again, you're not using flash, but most of the time at these weddings, it's not a huge problem. So again, make sure you're respecting the wedding. I know the rules are annoying, but really respect the wedding, follow the rules. You'll be able to still get great shots. Now, if you'd like to see an example of a wedding where I was at a larger church in Atlanta, I have a blog post of that on my website. And I was able to quickly build that with this video sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an online platform that can help you easily build your website and online presence. They have amazing templates that make it easy to quickly make a blog post like I did for the wedding I was just mentioning. One thing that makes it so quick and easy is the fact that you can use templates to build your whole website. You have templates for specific type of pages, like an about page, a blog page, even a commerce page. But remember, you can edit all this stuff as well to look like your own brand. So you're not just getting some copy and paste look on your website. You can customize it. I've done this personally on my website, which I've been using for over 10 years on Squarespace, and I have always been a fan of how easy it is to use. I've been using features like their commerce for physical and digital products, their analytics to help see where people are visiting my website from, their blog pages like I mentioned before, and also their email campaigns. So if you're looking to build a website, I highly recommend doing it with Squarespace. Check out the link in the description below for 10% off of your first website or domain. Now that we know what to do before the wedding, let's talk about what to do when you first arrive to the wedding. Now, to give the longer story picture, to start out, when you first get to the church, make sure to take your establishing shots. These are going to be shots of the church outside and also detail shots inside. Now, after you've taken the time to get your detail shots in, find the officiant as quickly as possible. We want to approach the officiant and ask them if there are any rules for the church. I know we probably already have a list from asking it before the wedding, but it's important to ask the officiant as well, because sometimes they'll be a little bit more lax and you'll know where you can lax up on some of those rules. So for instance, that wedding I did in Atlanta, when I talked to the officiant were friends of the couple, and so I could tell it was a little bit more lenient. Because of this, I ended up using flash when they came in and when they left, but not during the ceremony. I was even able to get fairly close to the altar as well, just respecting the altar and not getting up there, because they were like, yeah, you can move around, it'll be fine, just don't be loud, don't be distracting and things, don't use flash. So find the officiant, ask them, and you'll be able to tell, like, if they're super uptight and they're just like, then don't push it. Don't push any of the rules. Just follow them to a T. Try not to do too much. If you can tell they're a little lenient and they're like, yeah, as long as you don't come up here, like do whatever and be quiet about it, then go ahead. Bend the rules a little bit. Get the shots you need to. You've brought the gear that you need, so it's not going to be a problem at all. Now that you've talked to the officiant and you kind of know how strict or not they're going to be, now you can get a game plan of where you're going to stand and where you want to be. Communicate this with your second photographer and speak with the videographers if there's another team there with you about where everyone's going to be. And then for the most part, especially in the larger churches, try not to move around too much. Now, for the smaller churches or the more modern churches, you should be able to move around. They don't care about the tradition as much. But again, the biggest churches and those middle ground churches that still kind of have stained glass windows, Those will be the ones where you don't want to bend the rules too much. They will definitely have a problem with you. And the thing is too, you might think like, oh, I'll just bend the rules or whatever. Like some of these officiants will stop the wedding in the middle of it and like literally call you out in front of everyone. So like trust me, don't push the rules. Just like stick to the rules and do what you're supposed to. Now you're ready to shoot the wedding. So the wedding starts, everyone's proceeding in. The hardest part with a lot of these larger churches is when they open those two big doors, it's usually totally blown out behind everyone proceeding in. This is again why I used flash when they were coming in. And generally, you should be able to get away with some flash at the start of the ceremony and at the end. But again, when everyone's up on the altar and everything's happening, no flash then. They're going to have issues with it and no one's going to like it. And honestly, a lot of times you don't even need the flash. The thing with a lot of these churches is everyone's always scared thinking it's going to be super dark, but the altar area generally will always have kind of like spotlights on it. It's always the brightest area. What you'll come to find is you actually have to compensate for the stage being so bright comparative to the rest of the church. The church itself will be dark, but the altar is usually fine. And this is why whenever this question comes up and everyone's so worried about churches, I'm like, I've never found it to be that hard. Obviously, you're going to be writing your ISO a little bit, but the altar is bright. You're usually pretty good. So people are proceeding in, use a little bit of flash. Again, they're going to be backlit and that area of the church is going to be dark. Now, again, sometimes they're like exclusively no flash at all. If that's the case, you're going to want to ride your ISO a little bit. Know your camera's limits for where you like it to be. Basically, every camera has an area where you're okay with the amount of digital grain that is adding to the photo, and you can also edit a lot of that out in Lightroom. So for me, that's generally around 800 to like 2500 on Fujifilm cameras is usually fine. The GFXs can go a little bit higher than that. Obviously, I can push it much higher, but that's just the range I like to stay in. So again, know your camera and know where you would like to be. Now that everyone has proceeded in, everyone's up on the altar, you have your couple there. Generally on the bigger churches, the wedding party is going to sit down, so they're sitting down in the pews. This is for the bigger churches and the mid-sized churches. Modern churches can be kind of all over the place, but generally they're going to be lit much better. Like, look at this church that I'm going to be shooting at in a couple of weeks. It's like open air. There's going to be a lot of light. Maybe it might be backlit and stuff, and I might need some flashes, but other than that, like, this is not going to be a problem. So again, the modern churches aren't as hard. It's the old school churches that give you more problems. So everyone's up on the altar. There's a lot of light. You're fine. Raise your ISO if you need to, but for the most part, it's not going to be a problem whatsoever. However, if it's still a little dark, come down on your shutter speed. Generally, especially with the larger churches or like your Catholic full mass wedding ceremonies, they're pretty slow. They're pretty long. No one's really moving. So you should be able to get away with like 1/100 or even 1/60 and not get a lot of blur. So raise your ISO some, and if you don't want to raise your ISO, drop your shutter. But again, dropping your shutter should be like the secondary thing. The first thing always is going to be raising your ISO. Know your limits, know that you might get some motion blur, but keep it around that 1/200, 1/100, somewhere in that range, and you usually won't get too much motion blur. Because you're going to be using slower shutter as well, make sure you're shooting those slower in between moments. There's not going to be a lot of motion, and you're not really going to be able to get everyone's facial expressions as much, but when they're standing together, when they're smiling, when they're touching hands, get those moments. There's not going to be a lot of movement, but when there is, those usually aren't totally the moments you're going to really want anyway. Since you're shooting the in-between moments, even with slow shutter, you're going to get those shots and they're going to be on. So it's not going to be a problem. You're going to be able to get great shots. And then once they've hit the first kiss and they're proceeding back out, it's again a little dark because they're going to be backlit from the altar area as well. If you're able to, go ahead and use some flash there as well, just to brighten them up some. Or if you don't want to use flash, this is where you can use the continuous LED. I've talked about this before when I talk about taking sparkler exits, which I'll link that video up above. But this is a way for you to have a light that's not going to be as distracting, but it'll fill in your couple with a little bit of light as well. So if you really are too scared and you don't want to use flash at all, Get a continuous LED for when they're proceeding in and out. Just know that LEDs sometimes can be not as powerful as you would want, so you kind of have to compensate with that, but it should work out really well. Now that the wedding's done comes the most important part, which is editing the photos. Again, since we were riding our ISO a bit, we're going to now have to deal with the repercussions of that, which is going to be more grain on our photos. So when you're in Lightroom, there's a couple of things you're going to want to focus on when editing these church wedding photos. The number one thing I would say is to make sure to run all your photos through the AI denoise. AI denoise is absolutely amazing in Lightroom, and it's going to clean up your photos so much. You can see here this photo is at 1600 ISO. Again, it was fairly dark. And even though we're lit fairly well up here, we have a pretty good amount of grain. If I zoom in 200 or 300%, you can really kind of see it here. It's pretty grainy. So you're always going to want to run everything through the AI denoise. Now, if you've never used the AI denoise, it's here under detail. You turn it on and then you get a range for how much you want to use it. Generally, I would say, honestly, keep it definitely below 50%. I usually am around 30 or below because the more you use it, the worse your photo is going to look, and it's going to start making the photo look like AI. So right now I have it on 50, and you can see it's definitely cleaner, but it's, it's AI denoise. Honestly, it feels like it kind of rebuilds the lines. So again, this is why I don't lean on it too much. A lot of the times I'm just gonna set it around 30 and leave it there. After you've denoised your photo, this is where you would apply your presets if you have one. If you're wedding photography and you're not using presets, I really think you should because it speeds up the process. And now when we talk about presets, I'm not saying like buy my presets or anything. I mean, you can if you want to, shameless plug. But make your own preset. You can do this. Once you get to a place where you like the way the colors look when you edit your photos, save it as a preset. That's super important to do and it'll speed up your workflow. So I have a lot of my presets over here. I can apply that to get the color tone that I want. Oh, it done turned off my denoise. Okay. And then from there, I'm going to deal with color tones, highlights, and exposure. Now, the next thing you may end up needing to deal with is going to be any type of spot changes you want to do. This photo here doesn't need it, but if you need it to, basically you're using your brush tool here where you can select different things. You can see Lightroom gives you options to select the subject, the sky, people, so on and so forth, or you can brush it in. You can brush in different sections. This comes in very handy if you have a church where the stage and the church area have a super different white balance. I've seen this before and it's the worst to deal with. But basically, if you do have something like that, what you're going to end up doing is brushing in a section, let's say. Let's say this was too, I don't know, cool or warm. So after you brush in a section, now you can make changes to only that section. So I can warm up just that section. I can cool it down. This is hugely important, but while you're doing it, make sure to keep the changes minimal. They're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be able to like fully change it. This goes back to like making sure you're getting everything in camera. But if you need to just bump it a little bit so that it works, make sure you're doing that. Between making masks and being able to make edits in specific spots and also using the AI denoise, you should be fine in church weddings like this. You can see even at 1600 ISO, this looks great. And again, this is a wide shot. So even if at 300% it's not the tack sharpest photo in the world, it doesn't matter as much because no one's looking at it like that. That's the biggest thing you need to remember. A lot of people sit there and pixel peep where it's like, if you print the photo's going to be small, or even if it's large, you're still not looking at it like that. I haven't even applied sharpening or anything yet to this photo, so that's not a problem at all. So denoise, use your presets, make it look good, and do not denoise too high. Do any spot changes and white balance changes depending on how the room looks. Church weddings can be intimidating, but I hope this helped you get an idea of how you can handle one. If you're a seasoned wedding pro, leave some tips in the comments below for other newer wedding photographers. At the end of the day, the real reason I share all this education is to make sure that wedding couples are getting beautiful photos, and there's not a lot of people out here with just cameras taking photos out of the blue and giving all the couples just trash photos. No one wants that, right? So share the knowledge around so there can be better photos for everyone. And if you enjoyed this video and it was helpful, give it a like and subscribe for more videos. I also have some more wedding photography education you can catch here, and I will catch you all next time.